Robin and I have an employee. We call her a nanny. She comes over, she helps with caring for the kids, and she helps with schooling the kids.
She's over all the time. So she doesn't go anywhere. Her husband's the only one that does the shopping. So I don't understand why Isabel can't come over and hang out. She's devastated.
What is the nanny and her husband doing that makes it so?
Hi besties. Two hearts, let's get into it because today's topic is intense, emotional, and honestly, pretty heartbreaking. You know, when you think about family, you imagine warmth, safety, and support, right? But what happens when that same family environment becomes a battlefield, where rivalries, parenting clashes, and unresolved anger spill over into the lives of innocent children? That's exactly what we're diving into today. Christine Brown and Meri Brown's tense relationship has always been a hot-button issue for Sister Wives fans. But recently, Christine's daughter, Meikelty Padron, opened up about what it was really like growing up in that household, and trust me, the picture she painted was far from peaceful. And here's the thing, this isn't just, two adults not getting along. No. This is about children being caught in the crossfire, about fights escalating to the point where kids were left in tears, and about how different parenting philosophies can turn sister wives into enemies. So, buckle up, grab a snack, and let's unpack all the drama, the trauma, and the lessons hidden in this story. But before we begin, tell me in the comments, do you think two completely different parenting styles can ever coexist peacefully under one roof? Or is conflict unavoidable? I really want to know your thoughts on this one. Alright, let's start at the beginning. So, Meikelty recalls that her mom, Christine, didn't always share every single detail about her disagreements with Meri. Christine would mention some of the bigger blow-ups here and there, but she wasn't the type to constantly vent about it. Meikelty, on the other hand, remembers far more of those clashes, and some of them left a lasting mark. There was one particular fight that really stood out. Meikelty doesn't go into super graphic detail, out of respect for the people involved, but she does reveal that Meri crossed a serious line. She says Meri was verbally harsh toward one of her siblings, to the point that the child broke down crying. And we're not talking about a little tantrum here. We're talking about tears, deep sadness, and emotional hurt. That sibling eventually went to Christine, telling her what had happened, and Christine didn't hesitate. She marched straight upstairs into Meri's apartment in the Lehigh house and confronted her. Can you picture that moment? Christine, usually the more go-with-the-flow, fun mom, finally drawing a hard line and saying, "Don't talk to my kids like that. Don't ever cross that boundary again." And Meikelty remembers that confrontation vividly. To her, it felt like a turning point. She was grateful, relieved even, because it meant her mom was finally standing up against Meri's treatment. She thought, yes. Finally, make something happen. Protect us. Take that power away from her. For a kid, seeing a parent defend you like that can be life-changing. It signals safety, validation, and love. But the reality is, this wasn't a one-time thing. Meikelty makes it clear that Meri and Christine's fights weren't rare explosions, they were recurring storms. Multiple arguments, multiple clashes, and an ongoing war over boundaries, discipline, and control. Now, here's where it gets even more complicated. Meikelty admits that she personally bore a lot of Meri's wrath growing up. She always felt a little different from her siblings, more rebellious, more outspoken, more willing to push boundaries. And Meri, who already had a strict and controlling streak, seemed to focus much of her frustration on Meikelty. But it wasn't only her. According to Meikelty, Meri's sharp words and harshness sometimes spilled over onto other siblings too. So this wasn't a simple case of Meri versus Meikelty. It was more like Meri's rigid expectations clashing with the chaos of a big, blended polygamist family where kids were bound to make mistakes, break rules, and test limits. And honestly, let's pause here and reflect. Imagine being a kid in that environment. You're already growing up in a plural marriage household, where resources are stretched thin, emotions are constantly running high, and your dad is dividing his time among multiple wives and children. That's already complicated enough. Now add in the fact that your moms, the women who are supposed to function like co-parents, can't stand each other, don't respect each other's methods, and are constantly fighting over who has authority. How do you think that affects a child's sense of safety? Their confidence? Their emotional stability? Exactly. It creates a storm where kids don't know who to trust, who will protect them, and what behavior will set off the next explosion. And when you listen to Mykelti share her experiences, you realize, this wasn't just a bad day kind of thing. It was a constant undertone in their household. A tension that never really went away. Now, let's shift gears a little and talk about Mykelti herself, because her story adds another layer of complexity to this already tense family dynamic. See, Mykelti has always described herself as different from her siblings. She wasn't the quiet, obedient type who just went along with every family rule. Instead, she had this streak of independence, this fire inside her, and honestly, a bit of rebellion too. And in a household rooted in polygamy, strict modesty rules, and a very conservative lifestyle, that difference stood out like a flashing neon sign. She admits that as she grew older, especially during her high school years in Las Vegas, she started pushing boundaries. She wanted to experiment, to live a little, to test limits. She wasn't the type to sit quietly and follow every rule of the cult, as she sometimes refers to it. She was creative, expressive, and eager to try things outside of the narrow framework she grew up in. In fact, she even shared a story on her Patreon about being invited to a party in high school where she got way too tipsy. Her mom, Christine, had to come pick her up. And here's the wild part, Christine didn't scold her or shame her endlessly. Instead, she simply came, helped her, and got her home safe. Mykelti said that wasn't even the only time, it happened more than once, and Christine still always came through for her. Now pause for a second and think about that. On the one hand, some parents would be horrified, embarrassed, maybe even furious. But Christine? She handled it with compassion. She chose to be the safe place Mykelti could turn to, even when her choices weren't perfect. That says a lot about Christine's parenting style. Christine was the kind of mom who wanted her kids to be kids. If they wanted to jump on the bed, fine. If they wanted to rummage through the kitchen cupboards and play with Tupperware, why not? She believed in letting her kids explore, create, and sometimes even make mistakes without harsh punishment. And honestly, a lot of fans connected with that approach. They saw Christine as the warm, nurturing mom who tried her best to keep childhood joyful, even when money was tight and family stress was everywhere. But Meri? Meri was on the opposite end of the spectrum. Meri wanted structure. She wanted rules. She wanted respect for boundaries, neatness, and discipline. She didn't want rowdy kids running around messing up her home or pushing against expectations. And when she saw behavior she didn't approve of, she didn't hesitate to step in, even if it wasn't her child. And right there, you see the spark that fueled countless fights. Because here's the golden rule of parenting dynamics: no mom wants another woman stepping in and scolding her child. Period. That's an instant recipe for conflict, resentment, and, in this case, explosive showdowns between sister wives. Now, to make things even more complicated, remember that Mykelti wasn't just any kid. She was outspoken, sometimes rebellious, and not afraid to test boundaries. She wanted to wear less modest clothing. She wanted to break away from the super strict mold. And when Meri saw that, well, to her, it probably felt like chaos. So when Mykelti says she bore the brunt of Meri's wrath, it makes sense. Because in Meri's eyes, Mykelti wasn't just a kid breaking rules, she was a challenge to order, a reminder of everything Meri couldn't control. And besties, let's be real for a second. If you've ever been in a blended family, or even just watched one from afar, you know how fragile those boundaries can be. Who disciplines whose kids? Who gets the final say in house rules? What happens when one parent is laid back and the other is strict? It's a powder keg. And in this case, the explosion was inevitable. But here's where I want you to think deeper. Michael T has admitted she was a party girl in Vegas, and she doesn't hide that fact. But ask yourself this, was that rebellion simply her personality? Or was it, at least in part, a reaction to growing up in such a rigid, high-pressure, polygamist environment? Kids act out for all kinds of reasons. Sometimes it's curiosity. Sometimes it's independence. But often, it's a way of saying, I need freedom. I need space. I need to figure out who I am outside of these walls. And when you're stuck in a home where your mom is constantly butting heads with another mom, where rules change depending on whose space you're in, and where you feel singled out for being different, rebellion starts to look less like a choice and more like survival. Now, here's another fascinating piece. Michael T herself admits that while she was rebellious, she wasn't completely alone in wanting more freedom. Other older sisters, like Maddie, also wanted to wear shorter skirts or push against the modesty standards. The difference? Michael T was often more vocal and visible about it. And that visibility may have made her an easier target for Meri's frustration. So when Christine later wrote in her book about fights with Meri, she painted a picture of two completely opposite parenting styles clashing head-on. On one side, Christine, who let her kids be loud, playful, and imperfect. On the other, Meri, who wanted control, order, and strict respect for the rules. And it wasn't just one fight. Michael T is very clear, there were several incidents, several confrontations, and multiple moments when Christine had to step up and defend her children from Meri's harshness. And honestly, as a mom myself, I get it. I only have one child, but I don't let anyone yell at my kid. I don't believe in harsh discipline, corporal punishment, or constant scolding. I believe in redirection, in talking it out, in teaching instead of punishing. So when I hear about Christine defending her kids against Meri's yelling, I completely understand. That mama bear instinct is universal. But here's where it gets messy. Because if we flip the lens and look through Meri's perspective for a moment, you can also see why she might have felt frustrated. Imagine being in a house full of kids, some of whom aren't biologically yours, and watching them fight, act out, or sometimes even get physical with each other, while their mom doesn't step in the way you think she should. What do? Stay silent and let it happen? Or intervene and risk stepping on toes? Neither option is great. And that's what makes this story so tragic. Because at the end of the day, it wasn't really about Meri versus Christine. It was about kids who needed safety, consistency, and love, but instead were caught in a tug-of-war between two very different women. Now besties, buckle up. Because if you thought things were already intense between Christine and Meri, part 3 is where the cracks in the Brown family became impossible to hide. See, up until now, the fights were mostly behind closed doors, whispered stories, or anecdotes Christine shared later in her book. But eventually, those tensions boiled over so strongly that they spilled out on camera. And once that happened, there was no going back. Let's start with the basics. Christine has openly admitted that she and Meri fought a lot. And not just little spats or casual disagreements. These were full-blown arguments about parenting, about discipline, and about the way children should be treated in a plural family. And you know what? Michael T remembers those fights vividly. She said, "My mom talks about the fights she had with Meri here and there, but I actually remember a lot of them." That's a chilling thing to hear from a child, because it means those fights left a mark deep enough to stay burned in her memory. Now, think about that for a second. Kids don't usually remember every single detail of everyday life. What they do remember are the big moments, the moments charged with emotion, fear, or conflict. And if Michael T can still recall those clashes between her mom and Meri, that tells us these weren't small disagreements. These were moments of trauma. And here's where it gets heartbreaking. Michael T says that often, the fights centered around her and her siblings, because Meri was harsh with them. She yelled, she punished, she stepped in where Christine thought she shouldn't. And Christine? Well, Christine wasn't going to stand by and let her kids be mistreated. So she fought back. And besties, you know that saying, when two adults fight, the children bleed? That's exactly what happened here. Because no matter how much Christine tried to protect her children, they were still in the middle of the crossfire. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine being a kid in that house, hearing raised voices echoing down the hall, your mom defending you, another mom angry at you, the tension so thick you can't breathe. You don't know if you're safe, you don't know if you're in trouble, and you certainly don't feel loved by everyone under that roof. That's the environment Mykelti and her siblings grew up in. And here's another layer, sibling bullying. Mykelti admitted that she was often bullied by her siblings, especially the older ones. And let's be real, in a family of 18 kids, sibling rivalry is bound to happen. But bullying is different. Bullying is cruel, targeted, and damaging. Now imagine this, you're being bullied at home by your siblings, you're being scolded by another mom who isn't even your mother, and you're watching your actual mom get into screaming matches trying to defend you. That's not just childhood chaos, that's a recipe for lifelong scars. And we can see those scars today. Mykelti has said openly that those years left her feeling unloved by certain family members, and that she struggled with her sense of self-worth. She said she was different, and in that household, different didn't always equal accepted. Now, let's talk about something that's often overlooked, the role of the cameras. Because yes, all of this was happening behind the scenes, but once Sister Wives became a reality show, the cameras captured bits and pieces of it. And that raises a very heavy question, were the kids' struggles being exploited for entertainment? Think about it. Viewers saw snippets of tension, arguments, and even moments when the kids were clearly uncomfortable. But behind every clip was a real child, processing pain, confusion, and trauma. Did the show make things worse by shining a spotlight on those cracks? Or did it simply reveal what was already broken? Let's not forget, Christine herself has said that filming Sister Wives put enormous pressure on the family. It wasn't just about living polygamy anymore, it was about performing polygamy for the world. And that performance meant hiding some fights, exaggerating others, and constantly worrying about public image. For a child like Mykelti, already navigating a strict faith and a tense household, that spotlight only added more weight. And yet, through all of this, one thing stayed constant, Christine's protective love. She wasn't perfect. She made mistakes. But she never stopped defending her children. When Meri yelled, Christine intervened. When siblings bullied, Christine tried to step in. And when the whole system seemed against her, she still fought. And besties, that's something I think a lot of us can relate to. Whether you're a mom, an aunt, a teacher, or even just someone who loves a child, you know that instinct. That mama bear roar that rises up when your kid is hurting. And Christine embodied that. Even when it cost her relationships. Even when it made her the difficult wife. Even when it meant endless fights with Meri. But here's where I want to pause and ask you, my viewers, do you think Christine made the right call, constantly defending her kids, even if it made her clash with Meri? Or should she have tried harder to keep the peace for the sake of family unity? Because let's be honest, that's the dilemma in every blended family. Do you prioritize peace with adults, or do you prioritize the safety and happiness of children? And speaking of family unity, what about Cody? Where was he in all of this? This is another part that stings. Because while Christine and Meri were going to war over the kids, Cody was often absent, either physically or emotionally. He wasn't the mediator. He wasn't the peacemaker. And in many cases, his silence allowed the conflict to grow. And I think that's why, years later, we're still talking about this story. Because it wasn't just about two women fighting. It was about an entire system failing the children it was supposed to protect. So let's recap this part. Mykelti remembers the fights, because they were intense enough to leave scars. Meri's harshness made her feel unloved and targeted. Sibling bullying only deepened the pain. Christine fought back, becoming the shield her kids needed, but it came at the cost of family unity. And through it all, the cameras rolled, raising questions about whether the kids' struggles were being exploited for entertainment. And besties, this leads us into the final, most emotional part of the story, the reflection. Because now, years later, the Brown kids are grown. They've left the house. They're building their own families. But the question remains, what scars did they carry with them? And what lessons can we learn from the chaos of their childhood? At the end of the day, besties, Michael T's story isn't just about fights, rebellion, or family drama. It's about survival. It's about a little girl growing up in chaos and still finding her own voice. Christine may not have been perfect, but she gave her kids one priceless gift, unconditional love. And that love became the shield that helped Michael T push through the yelling, the bullying, and the strict rules that tried to crush her spirit. Today, as adults, these kids carry scars, but they also carry strength. Because sometimes, the hardest childhoods produce the strongest voices.